It first starts as a number go up thing, but when you start to realize that what makes Bitcoin so radically powerful is this then starts to become a very powerful tool that kind of radicalizes yourself in this world of nihilism. Sovereignty is understanding how the tools operate to protect your privacy, to protect your wealth.
Total annihilation of the dollar.
It's very clear to me that this system isn't going to work unless we just keep printing out more money to sort of finance the disaster that's already going. A great example would be Edward Snowden in 2014 when he fled from the United States. They had already shut down all of his bank accounts and everything else. And I actually think it's a pretty interesting Trojan horse because they don't really realize that most of the Bitcoins are already held by individuals. Governments probably will try to seize the Bitcoin that is held in those ETFs. Bitcoin allows for a very powerful outlet. Most people are locked in a form of general slavery where they're never going to get out. If you take this money and buy a bunch of Bitcoin and it goes to zero, we're broke. It's really going to radicalize and accelerate the pace of adoption. On one side, I can see them resisting very violently, gonna go for it and say all of my crazy ideas and beliefs and values. It's pretty sad. I like the moniker of, everybody gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. There's frankly not going to be any hope for them.
Well, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. It can feel very nihilistic.
I'd say the message is Bitcoin is hope. I believe that this is unequivocally the most important thing that's happening in the world today.
Eric, so I sat down and started reading your book about 2 weeks ago. And we went to the rainforest to escape, to be able to chill out for a while. I'd gotten 45% of the way through. Wife grabbed the book out of my hands and said, "You're done reading that thing for this holidays," and gave me a fiction book to read. And the reason being, as I started going on and saying Bitcoin makes its own time, and I was so escalated and I was so into it and I was just so hyped up about the way that you'd articulated the message of Bitcoin, and we'll dive into that. And Louise, my wife, beautiful, shout out to you, my darling. She's like, even if it's true, you sound like you're on drugs. I know you and I know you're not. And she's like, nobody's going to understand that, and pulled it away. So I've been talking about this book for the last 2 weeks. I managed to finish it Friday, which was super cool. I found it very eye-opening, very amazing on the consciousness, but I don't think it's probably the first book that somebody should read coming into Bitcoin. In your words, Eric, what's the purpose of this book? Because I find it quite radical. You've got an anarchist background. So if you can just sort of unpack the thought behind the book and how you got to this place. It's an amazing book. Definitely not a first Bitcoin book, though.
Well, I think for starters, I never intended for it to be a book. There was just a series of different essays that I had wrote sort of inspired from different conversations I'd had. And then the title specifically for Cryptosovereignty comes from, I really wanted to reclaim this word crypto from sort of the inane drivel that it's become. Yeah. It's so thoroughly abused within the greater crypto ecosystem. Yeah. Most people have forgotten that the actual praxis that makes Bitcoin operable is cryptography, but not even just in the application of cryptography itself, but truly the artistry of applying cryptography, which is what the word itself means. Yeah. And so for me, a lot of what Bitcoin represents is it first starts as a number go up thing, but when you start to realize that what makes Bitcoin so radically powerful is the actual truth that it has in it, and the way that there's only going to be 21 million, that you can go and verify it yourself, check everything behind it to make sure that we're actually doing the proof of work instead of just telling people that there's only 21 million. This then starts to become a very powerful tool that kind of radicalizes yourself in this world of nihilism, where you actually can start going, oh wow, like if we can actually take control of our economic sovereignty once again, that allows for us to actually make the internet itself become self-sovereign for everybody. And this really opens humanity up to a totally new task before us. And to me, that's the dual task of reclaiming sovereignty over our money and also reclaiming sovereignty over our data and privacy. Yeah. And so a lot of the book sort of dives into more of these esoteric ideals that get teased out from these concepts. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. How does somebody, when they start to understand Bitcoin, actually become sovereign by adopting a Bitcoin standard in their lives? How does that work together? So the way that I've seen it is first is just having actual economic sovereignty over your Bitcoin, realizing that you can't just leave it on exchange, you can't have all of your Bitcoin KYC'd, that you really need to actually take self-custody for your own Bitcoin and learn how these tools work. And to me, like, that's really kind of the first step in self-sovereignty, is understanding how the tools operate to protect your privacy, to protect your wealth. But then this then kind of extends into people start looking at like, oh, like what's all the food that I'm eating and where's it coming from? And am I actually self-sovereign if I'm going to the store to buy a bunch of boxes of crap that doesn't help me? And so there seems to be a pretty interesting shift that when people sort of realign towards the truth, that sort of happens everywhere in their life. And it happens to be that this economic factor of self-sovereignty is sort of the first leading one that then opens people up to, well, can I be self-sovereign with my food? Can I be self-sovereign with where I live? Can I be self-sovereign with my property? And all of those things. And I think it's a very important aspect in development that most Bitcoiners seem to go through once they've been here for a while and really kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah. So currently we're looking at a world of CBDCs as well as just total annihilation of the dollar. Really quickly, ladies and gentlemen, I've teamed up with the Bitcoin Way. This is the professional Bitcoin IT team. They can help you master your Bitcoin self-custody. Safety Namus, the author of the Bitcoin Standard, also recommends this professional Bitcoin IT cybersecurity team. Their guys are absolutely amazing. They can help you set up a node, protect your stack, get your Bitcoin off the exchange. Make sure that you are following best practices. Number one, that it's air-gapped. If you don't know what that means, I've put their details below for you. If you're worried about SIM swaps, reach out to the Bitcoin Way. Maybe you just want to know that you are doing the best thing. You're doing all the little tricks within your device to be able to make sure nobody can ever get into your Bitcoin, have any access. If you've got any queries about connecting to public USB and charging points, connecting to rogue Wi-Fi access points or malware-infected USB cables and flash drives, reach out to the Bitcoin cybersecurity team, the Bitcoin Way. Free 30-minute call. They are at the top of the description. Through inflation, and they're going to start printing money again, whether it's this year, like that's my opinion, Q3 of this year. They're going to drop interest rates. They're going to start money printing. Is that by design to destroy the dollar so much and then come out, like create their own problem basically by destroying the dollar and then bringing out a solution, which is their CBDCs? Do you see that happening? And is Bitcoin a protection against CBDCs? And if so, how?
Yeah, I definitely see the same thing. I'm not sure what the timetable looks like, but it's very clear to me that this system isn't going to work unless we just keep printing out more money to sort of finance the disaster that's already going. And then central bank digital currencies will be used to kind of create total financial surveillance and control. And to me, what Bitcoin really represents within that, and we've already seen it happen with a number of people. A great example would be Edward Snowden in 2014 when he fled from the United States. They had already shut down all of his bank accounts and everything else. And so the only way that he actually got out and was able to pay for the servers that he published all the information was with Bitcoin. Yeah. And we've seen again and again and again when there have been activists and dissidents that are under attack from their own government, almost always the first strike point is money. And they go after people's bank accounts, they seize their property, they take whatever they can through the legal recourse that they can. And that's just not possible if you're actually holding your own Bitcoin private keys in a self-sovereign way. Yep.
So what about the ETFs then? Are they an attack on Bitcoin and being a self-sovereign individual, or it's just allowing people to get exposure to the number go up side of things? Or could you see that potentially the BlackRock ETF and all the ETFs could be a way to distract people from being self-sovereign?
Absolutely. And I think it's a very interesting dynamic because pretty much all the financiers only see Bitcoin as a financial object for a number goes up. Yeah. And I actually think it's a pretty interesting Trojan horse because they don't really realize that most of the Bitcoins are already held by individuals who have that Bitcoin directly under their own ownership. And so to me, this is sort of by forcing the establishment through ETFs, allowing for them to hold Bitcoin, this paper version of Bitcoin, it really exposes the greater system to what Bitcoin can actually do. And so I think in the long run, what ends up happening is governments probably will try to seize the Bitcoin that is held in those ETFs. They'll probably try to put it on their own books. But as they do this, they're just going to force for number to go up even more. Yeah. They're going to make Bitcoiners become wealthier, and Bitcoiners are then going to use their wealth in order to actually start establishing more and more areas for themselves where they can have greater self-sovereignty. And we're already starting to see the projects of different people building out citadels, community projects, and all those sort of things. So I feel quite hopeful that even though we will see central bank digital currencies. There will be heavy financial surveillance and control. Bitcoin allows for a very powerful outlet outside of that. So,
yeah, what we've seen, and obviously history is not always a good indication of future performance, but we've been going through these 4-year cycles. Halving comes, the number basically goes up, finds the top, comes back down. It looks like the low for this cycle isn't. Like I'm pretty sure at least that is about 15,400, 15,800. We're sitting roughly maybe around the 70,000, high 60,000 at the moment. Something that I heard you say on another podcast is people should go out, get as much unsecured debt as possible, get as much Bitcoin as possible and not pay that debt back. What did you mean by that? Because that's a pretty radical idea as well.
Yeah, and you know, like this really comes down to individual preferences and stuff, but most people are locked in a form of general slavery where they're never going to get out. You've probably seen all these different TikTok videos of people bemoaning about how inflation has destroyed their ability to save. They can barely pay rent. They can barely get food. That's like a really disastrous and alarming place to be in. And again, I'm not trying to give financial advice, but a real option for people is to go get that unsecured debt, use that to buy Bitcoin, and then specifically if you're a nomad individual, you can just leave whatever jurisdiction you're in and go live somewhere else with your Bitcoin, and they won't be able to seize it because of the way that you have it. Again, this is a pretty radical approach and strategy that I think each individual needs to sort of make for themselves, but if you're part of this system that is exploiting you and you're not going to be able to get by, I don't see why this can't be a viable option for individuals to choose in a way to actually be able to not only get Bitcoin for themselves, but frankly to fight back against a system that's been exploiting them for their entire lives.
Yep. And saying that, it's not even hypothetical because you did something very similar yourself when you first got into Bitcoin as well. If I'm not mistaken, you took out quite a large loan.
I did.
And it sounds like eventually you paid it off. But what was that story and how did that come about? Because this was right in the early days. How did you first identify Bitcoin was something worth putting money into, and then how did you go about getting those loans, and what was that journey like?
You know, this was probably a year or two after I'd been into Bitcoin. I had really understood it. I thought the value proposition was there. You know, this is back when Bitcoin was in the hundreds of dollars range.
So we're talking like 2011, roughly?
This was 2013 that I did all this. And so it had gone through, I think it was its second kind of major bubble cycle, and then it collapsed.
Come back
down.
down.
The collapse, that's when I started buying more for myself. And really what I did is I was working in a bank at the time. I went to the loan officer there. I told him that I had this business idea to essentially buy Bitcoin miners to mine a bunch of Bitcoin. I didn't say Bitcoin, but I said doing computational computer puzzle solving to find a prize. And he thought it was a great idea, so he was like, here's a large unsecured credit line. You know, you'll need to pay it back in 4 years or something like that. And when I got it, I was going to go buy miners, and then I started just thinking, well, why don't I just buy Bitcoin directly? And I was pretty nervous because I had gotten approved for it, but I hadn't used the money. And so I went to my wife at the time, and I was like, hey, I'm kind of thinking of doing this. It feels crazy. I'm not sure if I can pull the trigger. And it was pretty wonderful. She was like, look, if you take this money and buy a bunch of Bitcoin and it goes to zero, like, we're broke. Yeah. She was like, but we're broke right now. So, like, nothing really changes. She was like, but if Bitcoin goes to the moon and it, you know, does all of the things that you think it is, and you don't do this, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life and be really upset with yourself.
Yeah.
So she was like, I'm not telling you what to do, but if you really believe in it that much, you should follow your heart. And so I did, and it worked out quite well for me. And with that being said, she followed suit after me maybe 6 or 9 months after.
Yeah.
And then she was upside down for like 3 years in terms of her holdings and stuff.
Just on that to interrupt, did she hold on those whole year?
Yep.
Well done.
Yeah, I was very proud of
Fantastic.
her for holding through that entire period of being underwater. And I also think that really helped her understand it more by going through that period and then finally getting into the black again. For her, I think that really orange pilled her to go, oh, like his strategy did work, and this is a viable way to save money and to be able to protect my own wealth rather than just having it sitting in some bank account where she's going to get zero interest on it.
Yep. And what's the best mind frame to approach Bitcoin at the moment? Like we were saying, it's just come out of the lows of the cycle, the halving's coming up. What's the best way for people to succeed? Should they just ape in, like throw all their money into it straight away? Should people, if they have the capacity, endeavour to get to one Bitcoin? What for everyone? It's obviously unique to each individual, but what do you think is like an easy takeaway for the average person to do in regards to Bitcoin and making the most of this opportunity? Like Bitcoin will probably always be cheap. I know yourself or me, like it's only at a $1.3 trillion market cap. It's got another 10x to take over gold, and that's only a matter of time. And then once it gets there, it's just going to take over everything, as Knut would say, infinity divided by 21 million. But for the average person, that's probably a few hours down the rabbit hole. Where should they start with their initial allocation, or if they've just been here maybe for 3 months or something, they heard about it with the ETF? What should they be doing right now to prepare for this cycle?
I'm a big fan of dollar cost averaging. So, that's just the tactic of take however much money you have, say it's $1,000, divide that up into 30 sections, and then just buy once a day. There's a number of apps that allow for you to do dollar cost averaging with daily purchases. And a little slight deviation from that tactic is I usually always advise people, maybe set aside anywhere from half to a quarter of the total amount that they want to invest to use for you to essentially try to play Bitcoin trader.
Yeah.
And this is just in trying to find whatever strike price you want to buy at because you think the price is going lower or higher or however. But this allows for you to actually kind of pay attention to how the market is evolving and changing and what it's doing. And I find that doing that over just dollar cost averaging, I think is wise because it helps people get a feel for what's going on in the market. They're going to pay more attention to sort of the news and how things are affecting the Bitcoin price cycles. And so to me, that I'd say that's probably the best starting place. But I think the most important one is if you're looking at this and you're curious about it, like you need to buy some, and that can feel like a big step at first, but you don't have to plow in hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can just buy yourself $100 worth of Bitcoin or $10 worth of Bitcoin if you really want to. And then once you actually have it, start playing with it. Maybe go buy a couple things, maybe try to transfer it to your own self-sovereign wallet, see what a transaction looks like and what a transaction hash is. And you'll slowly just start learning and actually gaining the actual knowledge so that you can hold and own Bitcoin and make sure that nobody can take away your ability to have financial sovereignty.
Awesome. Changing gears totally, we start having a conversation, and depending on how far you want to dive into this one, the role that Bitcoin has within religion, basically, I guess, Christianity and Muslim, and how Bitcoin, because it is aligned with truth, there's no usurpery, how it can play a role. How do you see the adoption, I guess, from those two sects?
Yeah, we're already seeing it happen right now. It's pretty exciting. Jordan Bush with Thank God for Bitcoin, he does really great work in the Christian community of educating people about Bitcoin. Same whole ideas apply both in Islam and in Christianity of the idea of usury, what they call riba in Islamic finance. Both religions see it as being a sinful act that you shouldn't engage in. And so I think anybody that is a serious Christian or a serious Muslim really needs to look at the fact that the fiat monetary system is an abusive and exploitive system that props up the military-industrial complex, which these things are fundamentally misaligned with what religion is. And specifically on the Islamic side, it's been really exciting to see that there's been a couple of fatwas that have been issued specifically saying that Bitcoin seems to actually be a halal kind of money, which outside of gold, there hasn't been a halal money in, since the fiat system took over. And so I actually think the entire Muslim community is going to get on board sometime in the next few years, and it's really going to radicalize and accelerate the pace of adoption kind of in the Middle East and in the Arab world in general. And I think it's really exciting because as that starts to happen, I think greater cross-religious dialogue is going to start happening between Christians and Muslims saying, hey, we find this very valuable for our community of people, you do too. Why is that, and how can we find alignment between each other? And so I think Bitcoin has a very powerful role to help play and facilitate new religious dialogues and people essentially seeing that this not only aligns with their religion, but with other major religions as well.
Yep. One of the areas that you touched on in your book is God is dead. Quite a fascinating concept. A question that I asked you yesterday was, do you believe God is actually dead, or it's just dead within the hearts and minds of the general population?
Yeah, and I think it's God is just dead in the hearts and minds of the general population. And this quote, "God is dead," it comes from Nietzsche. He wrote it in 1888 in The Gay Science, and this was Amorphism 126, I believe. And what's really important is that in Nietzsche saying that God is dead, he wasn't necessarily saying that the spiritual idea of himself was dead, but more of that the opening that we had created through scientific materialism and its acceleration into the world had sort of slayed God on its own. And to me, what Bitcoin represents is we're essentially rediscovering the radical truth that is God vis-a-vis cryptography and the truth that it must always tell. And this sort of resurrects this idea of God kind of vis-a-vis the internet and technology in a very powerful way that what I'm seeing more and more in the Bitcoin community is as people come to understand Bitcoin as this radical form of truth, they find that realigns them closer with their own spiritual and religious ideas that then frankly almost takes over who and how they sort of see and understand Bitcoin. And it seems to impel them on a mission of understanding that through utilizing Bitcoin in order to liberate people from the financial slavery that we find ourselves in, no matter what country you're from, there's a real possibility of creating a new solidarity that's not just about financial freedom, but it's actually about spiritual freedom and the relationship that those two share.
That's absolutely unreal. And you talk about Bitcoin being messianic. What does that mean? There's some amazing words. I learned a lot of new words within that book. Panopticon was a fantastic book as well, and that we're living in a panopticon. And maybe we'll dive into that one as well. But Messianic, what is that?
Messianic is the idea of the return of the Savior. In Christianity, it's the idea of Christ returning to earth. In Islam, they have their own idea of a Messiah figure coming called Mahdi. And to me, what Bitcoin really represents is that I do believe that this is sort of the return of God onto earth in a mysterious and encrypted form that only through us doing the actual research and work to try to understand what Bitcoin really is and how this form of radical truth augments everything in our fiat world, which the word fiat means by decree versus truth. It becomes this extremely powerful apparatus that, again, as I've seen with many Bitcoiners, is as you sort of build up all of the knowledge and understanding of what's really going on, there seems to be a moment that people sort of have a light bulb go off and they go, oh my God, this can actually rescue humanity from the circumstances that we found ourselves in, where there literally is one gigantic global surveillance system that's empowered by corporations working in tandem with one another in governments. And frankly, it seems dark and that there's no hope at all to escape from it. And yet somehow in that, Bitcoin is produced. Satoshi Nakamoto managed to prove the power of cryptography and perfect forward secrecy in using it correctly. And he offered us a pathway to find our way out of this darkness. And I think whether this is going to happen in 2 years or in 20 years or in 200 years, there's now a radical new potential for humans to realign their core ethical values with one another away from nation states and the fiat currency and the infinite wars that they use that money for, towards creating a new community of people that choose to not only eschew fiat money, but to work together to create a better world for one another.
Yeah, those people that are currently in control, self-labeled elite, they're not going to want to give up their power lightly. They've got the money printer, they've got total control, as much fiat money as they want. They can basically do anything and control anyone at any time. Is it going to be a smooth, easy transition to get onto the Bitcoin standard and align with truth, or what's that journey like from here to there? Because I don't see them just being like, okay, yeah, Bitcoin's a better idea. There you go, just have at it. Here's the existing financial system, slot in Bitcoin. I don't think they're going to let go of their power that easy.
I agree. I think one of the most interesting ones is with the financial incentives aligning much more closely with us than the alternative system. I think that the current people that are in power are going to find that there are lots of dissidents on their side in terms of they only care about money, and that's really the only thing that means to them. So for that reasoning, they'll go after an asset that's going to appreciate much greater and much more quickly than anything that they can create through the fiat system. And so that's one hopeful point. And it's really open-ended because on one side I can see them resisting very violently and directly attacking Bitcoiners in a number of ways and on a number of different fronts. But with this financial incentive thing happening and finding more and more people from the corporate and financial world coming to Bitcoin because of the way that number goes up, I think that this is sort of the Trojan horse of the ideas that I present in this book that might actually really help a lot of these people realize, oh, hey, I was participating in this system that's really exploitative and harmful, and I didn't think there was a way out of it. But Bitcoin actually is that way out. And this has been something that's been happening more frequently that I've found quite interesting, as I've met a number of very powerful financiers who worked on Wall Street and other places who very much were part of that system. And then when they discovered Bitcoin and what it could actually do for the world, they sort of had their own moment of conversion where they realized that what they were doing was wrong and they no longer wanted to participate in it. So it's hard to say kind of how it plays out, but more and more I'm actually feeling like it's actually going to be kind of smooth because of the actual functions of how the radical nature of truth and exposing to people actually converts them in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I'm actually pleasantly surprised that that's the way you think about it, because reading the book, it sounds quite radical, man. And for everyone watching, make sure there's probably your 5th or 6th Bitcoin book, not your first Bitcoin book, and or maybe after a cycle. It is incredible. What was your favourite part out of the book when you wrote it? What was the thing that really lit you up and you got excited about it?
I think it was the chapter Bitcoin is Messianic, because for me that was really sitting down and I was like, I'm just going to go for it and say all of my crazy ideas and beliefs and values, and I'll put it out there and see how people react. And it's sort of funny because now it's not as dramatic as it was when I first published the essay. But really from publishing that essay, a lot of people sort of came out of the woodwork and thanked me and shared their own ideas of how they see Bitcoin as being this messianic, hopeful power that they think can save humanity from the darkness that we're in as well. And yeah, I had a really great and interesting conversation with a good Bitcoiner friend last month where we were hanging out in New Zealand at a fancy resort that we were both invited to specifically to talk about Bitcoin stuff. And we're like, how is it by us just publishing crazy essays about our beliefs about this money system that we find ourselves here? And he just sort of laughed, and he was like, I don't know. He was like, but it's much more profound and beautiful and opening than anything I could have ever imagined. So I'm really happy that I get to be here and with you and that we know each other.
I find this with all Bitcoiners, to come to this conference, we're at Bitcoin Alive. I've been so hyped just to be around other Bitcoiners. And yesterday when we rocked up at the pavilion there, as soon as I walked in, I heard the word Bitcoin and I turned around. I'm like, oh, awesome. This is my people. Because you understand, once someone has made the commitment to buying Bitcoin for the first time, it can be a little bit scary. And then if you know that they've got into self-custody and they're attending a Bitcoin event, for example, or they're reading the Bitcoin books and they're not eating the bugs, they've put in a certain level of work, and some people can do it in a shorter period of time, but probably at least 100 hours pretty quick. And you've got a common theme to be able to relate to them and that foundation. And when you're around people that just think this is a get-rich-quick scheme or a pyramid scheme, they dismiss it straight away and they're not open to thinking about it. And whether something's right or wrong, good or bad, at least for myself, I want to understand what I'm saying yes or no to. I was that kid at school that always got in trouble for asking too many questions or telling the teacher that she was wrong or right. Even if she was right, but I thought she was wrong, I'd call her out. And then she'd be like, no, but I'd get them to explain it in a way that I could actually understand and get to it, where so many people hear the propaganda about Bitcoin on the mainstream news. They're like, no, it's a scam, it's a Ponzi scheme. What are your thoughts for the people that don't adopt the Bitcoin standard now? Because Bitcoin, in my opinion, is going to continue to go up and to the right forever. And on what time frame does it become the world reserve currency? Does that ever happen? I don't know, but I think the trajectory of this being the world's scarcest digital verifiable asset is one way, and that's up and to the right. For the people that are too afraid to do it, they don't have the capacity to do it, and I'd challenge anyone watching here, you've obviously got a phone or a computer watching it. They've got the capacity, they've got some resources behind them. What happens to the rest of the population that doesn't adopt this Bitcoin standard before that shift happens? Do they stay a slave?
Yeah. Pretty much. It's pretty sad. I like the moniker of, everybody gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. And if you think it's a Ponzi scheme or a scam or whatever else, first of all, I'd encourage you to actually think about it and do work towards it to try to understand it more deeply, and also apply the same amount of criticism and critiquing towards the current monetary system and standard that you live on. Because the truth is, I think most people haven't really thought concisely or critically about what their money system is and how it functions. And
Absolutely.
Most people allow for themselves to be too intimidated by the very idea of either Bitcoin or trying to understand the monetary system in a meaningful way. When the truth is that you must do that work if you want to actually liberate yourself. And in the same way that if you want to have sovereignty over the ability to have your own food, well, you need to have the knowledge to understand how to adequately grow the food. And so very much like Bitcoin, if you want to actually be self-empowered to own the most scarce digital asset that exists, that seems like it is going to become the most powerful financial vehicle in the world, you're going to actually need to do the work to understand it. Nobody else can do that for you. And I find that that's actually really kind of the jumping off point is if people give themselves permission to or not to actually start really meaningfully questioning things and really sincerely asking the questions that are going to help them understand it. But if they can't allow for themselves to do that, and I've met many people that can't do that, there's frankly not going to be any hope for them to liberate themselves from an exploitative system that wants to keep them poor and impoverished.
Yeah, 100% agree. One of the things that I found is when I talk to people all the time, and a lot of people are sick of me talking about it to them, is they just simply say, I don't have the time to do it. My response to that is you've been working your whole life, maybe you're 50, maybe you're 60, maybe you're 70, you're still working, and you haven't found 50 or 100 hours over your whole lifetime to understand what the money system is. Why is that? You've been working, or if they're young, you're going to work the next 40 years doing this thing for this fiat dollars. Do you know what it is that you're actually getting for your time and energy? And we can't get our time or our life force back. So I believe that's pretty important. You're writing a second book at the moment. Believe it's coming out at the end of this year?
Maybe. I mean,
come on, man. I'm already excited.
I'm dragging my feet on it. I'd like to. There's kind of a couple different book ideas that I'm working on. In addition to, I still would really like to get an audiobook out of this one. So
yeah,
I feel doubtful that'll come out before the end of this year, but you never know. I might get a wild hair and just hammer it all out at some point.
I think it's pretty important to get this one into an audiobook. Even when I started rereading it again after I got through that first weekend, I had to stop reading it all the time and actually disseminate and think about what you're saying instead of just racing through and reading it like some of the other books, which is good, and I enjoy doing that. This actually made me be like, wow, that's a really big idea to be able to have it in audible form. I'd read the book first, listen to it in Audible, and then listen to it in Audible again, because there is just so much packed into that. So that book's coming out. You're very prolific on X, on Twitter. But what takeaway for people? There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. It can feel very nihilistic. A lot of people may not have hope. But what message for anyone that is watching and they're listening, they're thinking about Bitcoin, or what action steps, and what's the message for everyone today?
I'd say the message is Bitcoin is hope. And if you give yourself the ability and capacity to actually research and understand it, you will find that hope on your own, because there will be a light bulb moment where you go, wow, this can actually solve some of the so seemingly endemic and unsolvable problems that we have in our world right now. And getting to hang out with other Bitcoiners and have conversations like this, it really allows for you to shift from this kind of very dark and black view of the world, of that there's no way that we could ever liberate ourselves from the circumstances, to realizing, no, we actually can do that. People are doing it right now. It's a growing movement that's gaining more and more people every day while the old system's atrophying. And so I'd really encourage people that if you're this far, keep going and keep pushing and keep educating yourself, because I believe that this is unequivocally the most important thing that's happening in the world today, and that anybody who's involved in the economic system, which is everyone, needs to actually really understand how they're being exploited, how fiat money is stealing from them, and how Bitcoin can protect them from that.
100% agree. My 3 rules: buy, stack, chill. Eric, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
The book, it's linked below. Cheers, brother. Thank you.